I will now give the floor to the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic.
صديقي العزيزين السيد رئيس الجمعية العامة فوك يريميتش والسيد نائب الأمين العام يان الياسون، السادة الزملاء، السادة الحضور، من المثير
Mr. Ambassador, may I again apologize and ask you to stop for a second, because I'm not going to allow a procedure to go on in this room without everybody being able to understand in each of the 6 languages of the United Nations what is being spoken from the rostrum on an issue of such huge importance. I apologize. This is my fault. Can we fix this, or I'm going to disband this meeting?
ستتوقف الجلسة. ايه اللخبطة؟
May I?
English اهو هنا English.
Thank you. May I? I'm here to replace لطفية. لو سمحتي تروحي على room 3. اوكي. حكموا عليكي وعلي. معلش Yes.
سوري هيتكلم دلوقتي.
Mr. Ambassador, I am told that it should be working now, and I very much hope that I got the right information. So may I please ask you to proceed with your remarks.
شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was saying at the outset that I had listened with great attention to the statement of my friend, the President of the General Assembly, Mr. Fuk Yeremich, a statement which I hope will be an integral part of the minutes of this meeting, because of the very careful, detailed analysis of the events in our region and the surrounding area, as well as a careful reading which predicts the oncoming days and what might happen if certain forces were to insist on rejecting a political solution and proceeding with gambling with the destiny of the region and the fate of our nations. I also wish to salute my dear friend Mr. Dan Eliasson. Mr. President, it is surprising indeed that the draft resolution under consideration was tabled under agenda item entitled Prevention of Armed Conflict, while the content of this draft totally contradicts the title and purpose of this noble agenda item. The draft resolution seeks to escalate the crisis and fuel violence in Syria by creating a dangerous precedent in international relations through attempting to legitimize providing weapons to the terrorist groups in Syria, as well as to pass an illegal recognition of a certain faction of the external opposition as, and I quote, the legitimate representative of the Syrian people, end quote. In spite of the fact that this already internally divided faction, and which lacks a leader, does not even represent the full spectra of the opposition itself, neither inside nor outside Syria. And yet, those who prepared this draft resolution found it appropriate to speak in the name and on behalf of the entire Syrian people and all Syrian citizens inside and outside the country, and to dictate to you that the legitimate representative of the Syrian people should be this minute faction of the external opposition, an opposition that was born and raised and nourished and nurtured in Doha, Qatar. It was nourished in terms of media. As for political nourishment, the same happened in other capitals inside and outside the region. It is worth noticing that whenever there are indications of a political solution to the crisis in Syria, the pace and size of terrorist attacks on the ground increase, and some member states intensify their efforts to abort this political approach, as if those states are conveying a message that a peaceful political solution based on dialogue is not allowed in Syria. This draft resolution is the best example of such an approach. It is, in effect, swimming against the current, especially in the light of the latest Russian-American rapprochement, which the Syrian government welcomed officially. Mr. President, hundreds of terrorist attacks, including suicide ones, which have harvested the lives of a great number of innocent victims among civilians. Well-known terrorist groups active in Syria publicly declare their allegiance to Al-Qaeda, which we all combat, but it seems that some people combat Al-Qaeda in theory and name only, and others are actually combating it in effect, because there are those who are supporting Al-Qaeda in secret and publicly. Thousands of foreign extremist terrorists and mercenaries are being brought to Syria with the involvement of intelligence agencies of other states in response to calls of Al-Qaeda leader and others in order to destroy the Syrian state and establish instead a, quote, jihadist Islamic caliphate, end quote, according to Al-Qaeda leader. Public and UN documented operations of arms smuggling into Syria are bringing in all sorts of weapons from Libya and elsewhere. These are all well-documented facts. Unprecedented savage crimes and documented violations of human rights are being committed by armed terrorist groups in Syria. Illegitimate, unilateral, coercive, economic, commercial, and financial measures are aggravating the humanitarian suffering of the Syrian people. Organized assassinations and kidnappings of Islamic and Christian clerics are taking place. The destruction of the oldest Jewish synagogue in the region in the suburbs of Damascus took place, and its contents were sold in the markets of Beirut and elsewhere by the merchants of death and suffering. Organized and systematic sacrilege and desecration of holy shrines and sites, in addition to barbarian attacks on archaeological sites and memorable intellectual figures, in a scene recalling the demolition of the Bamiyan statues in Afghanistan, the Buddha statues in Afghanistan, and similar uncivilized actions in Tunisia, Libya, Mali, and occupied Palestine. Mr. President, what I have just mentioned above is just the tip of the iceberg of what is happening in my country, Syria. This has been acknowledged even by officials of some capitals of member states who are co-sponsoring this draft resolution. However, it seems that the hands of the drafters have been disabled when it came to condemn those activities and highlight their gravity and danger on Syria and its people. The draft resolution does not even include the word terrorism, not even once. However, Mr. President, someone may suggest that demanding the drafters to include and condemn those terrorist activities in their draft would be a demand that cannot be met in the normal order of things, because in doing so, some of them would be condemning themselves, given that they are fully involved in all those activities which surpass in their criminality the crime of terrorism itself. Mr. President, it is very clear that the illegal seating of the so-called the National Coalition of the Syrian Revolution and opposition forces in the seat of the Syrian Arab Republic at the League of Arab States, and then the attempt by the drafters to get the General Assembly involved in granting that coalition a fake representative status of the Syrian people merely aims at undermining the Syrian state and its institutions as a whole and blocking any chance of a peaceful solution to the crisis in accordance with Security Council resolutions 2042 and 2043 and the Geneva Communique. Furthermore, this matter constitutes a flagrant violation of the rules of international law and the charters of both the United Nations and the League of Arab States. This so-called National Coalition of Syria, which was created in Doha, Qatar, theoretically includes 63 members, but in practice it only includes 53 members. Why? Why is that? Because those who invented this extremist opposition coalition, which rejects dialogue and exists in Doha, left 10 seats to be filled by secularists among Syrian opposition groups. And now that nearly a year has passed since then, the Qataris and their allies have yet to find 10 secularist Syrian opposition members who are willing to accept to be part of this coalition, which is naturally under the control and domination of extremist religious factions. Isn't it odd, ladies and gentlemen, that some member states which claim to work on bringing democracy and freedom to Syria and enable its people to determine the future they seek are the same states who confiscate the right of the Syrian people to choose their own representatives and leadership? Those states are trying to determine on behalf of the Syrian people that a certain group created artificially in Doha is the sole representative of the Syrian people. It seems, however, ladies and gentlemen, that those same states are introducing their own amendments to the concept of democracy, so that true democracy, from their own perspective, is based on the right of some foreign countries to choose the representatives and leadership of another country without any internal intervention from the people of that country itself. This is the reading and the vision that some of the drafters of this resolution have. Mr. President, we have brought to everyone's attention repeatedly the destructive role of the League of Arab States, led particularly by Qatar and Saudi Arabia, with this new member of the League of Arab States now, Turkey. A destructive role in regards to the Syrian crisis, starting with manipulating the Arab Observer Mission in Syria, and recently the latest decision which granted the League of Arab States members the right to provide arms to terrorist groups in Syria, that is tantamount to supporting and financing terrorism according to relevant international legal standards. These decisions not only contradict the role of regional organizations as stated in Chapter 8 of the UN Charter, but they will, if implemented, direct a deadly blow to the chances of finding a political settlement to the current crisis. This is precisely what some sponsors of this draft resolution aim at reaching. They do not want a solution of the Syrian crisis. They want a change of the regime change by whatever means possible. They call this a game. They call it changing the rules of the game. The suffering of the people of Syria, the stability of Syria, the fate of Syria is to them a mere game. I'm going to quote here a statement from the recent UN Special Representative Mr. Brahimi in his last briefing to Security Council on April 19, 2013 regarding the League of Arab States decision dated March 6, 2013, which was adopted in Doha.
The resolution is to be taken literally. This means that for the League of Arab States, the Geneva process is to be considered obsolete. No dialogue or negotiations are possible or necessary. If
the UN Special Representative said that on this draft resolution, what do you want me? What can we add? If the corruption represented by the Qatari and Saudi petrodollars has killed the credibility of the League of Arab States, undermined the integrity of its Secretary General position, and damaged Mr. Brahimi's mission, would the UN member states allow infecting our organization with this corruption? While we witness, as you very well know, that the Qatari and Turkish regimes who support religious extremism are taking the responsibility of the dialogue of civilizations, while the Saudi regime, who recruits terrorists, or as they call them jihadists, while that regime is undertaking the task of counter-terrorism via the center they created in the United Nations and financed with $10 million they granted in advance. Mr. President, the Syrian government has reacted positively to all initiatives that sought peaceful settlement to the crisis in Syria. I would like to announce from this forum once again that the Syrian government is totally serious and sincere in achieving a Syrian-led comprehensive national dialogue encompassing all components of the Syrian society and political forces, including all national, internal and external opposition groups and the militants who are ready to give up their arms for the benefit of a peaceful solution and to resort to common sense and logic. There are genuine judicial and security guarantees to secure the safe return of the external opposition forces, including the so-called opposition coalition, if they are willing to participate in the national dialogue and the political process. The great majority of the Syrian people, ladies and gentlemen, rejects violence and chaos and supports a prompt, peaceful political solution to the crisis, a solution that preserves their right to life, security, stability, citizenship, justice, while maintaining their country's capabilities and securing their future away the future of their children away from extremism and terrorism. Hence, those Syrian opposition factions, if they are genuinely keen to preserve the best interests of Syria and end the bloodshed of the Syrians. Those opposition factions who reject dialogue and claim that they want the best interests of Syria are requested to put aside their personal grudges, reject any implementing of foreign agendas, and should engage in the national dialogue. I appeal to all Syrians to be vigilant to the goal of some foreign capital involved in the Syrian bloodshed, which is to allow the continuation of the crisis in Syria as it is now in order to drain the country's capacities and achieve the total destruction of its infrastructure and social fabric. The only loser in this case will be Syria and the Syrians, and the only winner will be those who wish harm and ill for the country. A quick review of distant and recent history in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and other countries will make us realize quickly that the core issue is not at all about human rights, humanitarian situation, spread of democracy, and the best interest of the people of any one country. We all agree on that. However, what is at issue and what is the real goal is exclusively about political, military, and economic interests that only lead to insecurity, destruction, crime, the disintegration of the country, sectarianism, poverty, and several other problems that will need tens of years to solve. I would like to emphasize to everyone that the real solution to the Syrian crisis at the end of the day will only be exclusively a Syrian solution and a Syrian-led solution. According to all the above, my delegation requests to put the draft resolution contained in document A/67/L63 to the vote. And we urge all member states to vote against this draft resolution. In conclusion, Mr. President, I would like to draw your attention and the attention of the members present here. A very important fact, a piece of information that indicates the depth of corruption currently existing in some offices of this international organization, some of the offices of this international organization. There is an email message that reached several high officials in this organization, an email that originated from Doha, sent by the so-called the ambassador of the coalition in Qatar. This so-called ambassador is the one who gave the instructions to the terrorist group called Brigade of the Martyrs of Yarmouk to kidnap members of the Philippine Brigade in the United Nations disengagement force in Golan on Dov. The ambassador of the coalition in Doha, who was given the embassy of Syria in Doha by the Qatari authorities, is the one who supervised the negotiations with the kidnappers who kidnapped members of the Philippine UN forces in Golan. He did that twice. The first time when they kidnapped 21 members and took them to Jordan, where pictures of them were taken there for the record and for memories, and they were provided with tea and refreshments and food before being released in order to return back through the separation zone and then back into Syrian territory. And then again, a few days ago, when they kidnapped 4 members from the Philippine UN troops. This is the email right here. With a telephone number used to issue instructions from Doha is 009745577546. This email is now available in many offices at the UN Secretariat building, and yet nobody has mentioned it. Nobody said anything about it. Even though this matter relates to the safety of UNDOF members in Golan. I don't want to speak much more about this. It's self-explanatory. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Syrian Arab Republic. And now I